Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Michaela Peters. Today I want to talk about 5 things that I really like about Finland that stand in stark contrast to the US. And it seems like these videos about Finland while I'm in Finland really seem to pick up traction, so I'm gonna keep going with that theme. Probably also because I'm in a better mood, happiest country in the world. I think part of that has to do with the fact that I'm just kind of chilling and detoxing from some of the stresses that I deal with in the US, but that's a whole separate concept in and of itself. But I am going to actually talk about some of those things in this video and expose how the lack of them that exists here in Finland really does make it a place where I enjoy being. The first thing I'm going to talk about that I love about being in Finland is public transportation. Now, a lot of people would consider that having a private car is generally a better thing to have. Yes, obviously it's more expensive, but for me personally, I thoroughly do not enjoy driving. Even if it's going to be shorter and, help me get somewhere faster, yes, I still rather take public transportation due to the fact that I can do whatever I want while I'm taking public transportation. I can read, I can answer my text messages. While I'm driving, my options are listening to music, calling people, and in general, driving just tends to make me anxious. It's not really like I'm a bad driver. I've been driving for a long time and I've driven from New Jersey to Texas 6 times, most of those times by myself, but there is sort of a social aspect to driving that I don't particularly enjoy. So people can get really aggressive. There can be traffic. There's just a lot going on during driving that I don't need to pay attention to if I'm using public transportation. So I really love public transportation. I wish that we had it accessible in the US, but as many people know, not only is it not super accessible, it doesn't run very consistently or very often, and it is very, very difficult to use. So if you're traveling in the US, most often you have to rent a car, and it's probably one of the reasons I still don't travel very much in the US. Number 2 is lack of financial stress. So I would say that this does pertain more to Finns themselves than foreign people living here, since the job market is a little bit tighter for foreign people and they're not necessarily entitled to all those Kela benefits. Not that I necessarily believe they should be, but when I say this, it maybe does sound a bit counterintuitive. But in general, for me as an American, there are a lot of things here that are cheaper than being in the US, mostly in terms of infrastructure, like the fact that housing is cheaper and the fact that I don't have to have a car. So these 2 major costs being not necessarily eliminated, but particularly reduced, definitely makes it less financially stressful for me to be here, even if it's just for a very brief period of time. There are also a lot of student benefits, which I luckily am able to make use of as a PhD student, like somewhat discounted meals at the university, in addition to train tickets. So there is that. Next is a very obvious one, which is the fact that healthcare is public here and not privatized the way it is in the US. Now, obviously, you still have the option for privatized healthcare in Finland, and people do choose to use it sometimes, but the fact that you can go and get anything done, and just for seeing a doctor, you're not paying hundreds of dollars. Even sometimes when you have insurance in the US, it can still be really expensive to use your healthcare plan. So when you're comparing US salaries, a lot of times you have to think about whatever salary you hear, that's not what you're taking home, because you still have to fund your retirement funds, because you don't necessarily get the government doing that for you automatically, and you also have to fund all of your healthcare expenses yourself out of your paycheck, and that can really suck and make it feel like, okay, your salary number sounds good, but you're not really getting very much for it. And I think that the more people think about it, the more they do understand that. Number 4 is lack of competition, and I mean this in so many senses of the word. So that may sound kind of counterintuitive also, due to the fact that, for instance, I know it's a lot more competitive to get into certain degree programs here. You have to test into them. We don't necessarily have all of that in the US. Sometimes it's just, you can just decide you want to do something and maybe you figure out the hard way that it's a little bit too difficult for you. But in general, people are just not secretly competing with each other either. Sometimes it feels like in the US, when I keep in touch with friends over the years, and this isn't with everybody, but maybe with some friends, where it can feel like people are sort of comparing where they are in life. Now, I have not necessarily super experienced this yet, but I've heard that also becomes even more prevalent when you get to the point where people are getting married and buying houses and having kids, and people sort of have this imaginary timeline by which they're supposed to have reached each of those things, and that is also something that maybe you're secretly competing with your friends against. Achievements were probably more of the thing when we were younger, but people do like to brag about how much they're involved in, how hard they're working, and that's just not something that you see in Finland because a sense of humility is so ingrained in the culture, which is more of a personal value. So that's something that I really appreciate a lot, like really a lot and very deeply. In fact, I often tell people that one of the reasons I went to work for NASA was because there was such an aura of humility working there, because they felt very strongly about, we've lost some lives sending people to and from space, and it's very important for us to make sure we're checking our work and doing our due diligence. So even though there's obviously a lot of really smart people at NASA, they were still very humble with regards to their intelligence. So I appreciate that a lot. But in Finland, it's well known that CEOs will still take the bus and walk around in normal clothes, and that's just how it is. And I don't know, that part I really appreciate so much. Finally, number 5 is people mind their own business. And I think that kind of goes along with lack of competition, because people are not going to ask you prying questions to try to secretly assess who you are or where you are or how you are. If anything, people maybe are curious and ask questions that may seem kind of nosy out of genuine concern, but they're rarely trying to do it to make a judgment or to compare themselves against you, which is not necessarily the feeling that I get when people are asking me questions in a US context. So I think that's everything. And again, those are the things that I really like and appreciate about being in Finland, both maybe from an infrastructure or, just how things are laid out in society, and in addition to how the culture is and the way that it differs quite a bit from American culture. So that's everything that I have for today. I'll try to keep making these videos because people seem to like them, and it's good for the algorithm. So thank you. And as I'm going to keep saying, I'm trying to grow the Finnish side of my channel, so don't forget to like and subscribe if you found this video interesting. All right, thank you and bye.